recognize the presence of Shamila Nair, Assistant Director General of Natural Sciences from Unesco, and Honorable Jane Ark, Minister of Environment, Government of Rwanda, Antares, our Regional Director for UNESCO in Eastern Africa, Dr. Juliet, Regional Director for UN Environment. I think she'll be joining soon. And Dr. Mahama, the Director, Department of Human Resources, Science and Technology from Africa Union. In addition to that, I mean, we have 4 expert presentations they'll be introduced separately during the next session. And I have the honor in sharing the floor with Professor Beth from University of Rwanda. Just a background, every year on 5th of June, the World Environmental Day is being celebrated. And this year, the main message, what we received is that the protect the environment to prevent the pandemics. So already the nature is sending us a clear message. If we don't listen to it, then we are going to be in trouble. The adverse effect of climate change and environmental change are playing a hazardous role in worsening the human health. During this pandemic, over 70% of the infectious diseases are originated from wildlife, and that spread of diseases is aggravated by wildlife trafficking and wildlife markets and habitat destruction, finally the climate change. To just make it clear, the ecosystem in nature functions similar to our human body. When they are robust and healthy, which means they have diverse species and space for healthy animal population, they are more resistant to disease. The new coronavirus, which created the current pandemic, continues to spread through over 170 countries. Scientists are still at work trying to determine how the virus jumped from animals to human. We humans have encroached almost every corner of the planet. The more we disturb the habitat of the wildlife, the more chances to increase our proximity to these viruses. So finally, the conserving the global biodiversity along with a robust wildlife surveillance system need to be placed if we need to reduce the frequency of the pandemics in future. So with this short remarks, now I would like to, I'm happy to invite Madam Antares, the Regional Director, to give her opening remarks. Antares.
Thank you so very much, Jaya. I think this meeting couldn't have been organized at a better time when there are so many questions, and it looks like we could, in a lot of ways, be making a big contribution. Let me start by really recognizing the Honorable Minister. I believe she should still remember me. We had done some great things together some time ago in introducing a basic education Africa program in Rwanda. I believe is the same person here, Honorable Dr. Jeanne d'Arc. The name is very familiar. Of course, my dear friend and sister, Shamila, who actually, I must say, had prophesied about the need to really bring nature and human closer and in harmony. It is really, in a way, echoing that great passion with which you spoke about the harmony between nature and humans. And then, of course, my sister Juliet, I'm sure she's not joined us yet because she's making another presentation elsewhere. But she also, I'm sure, would really be somebody who would bring a lot of wisdom as well. And of course, our dear partner, Dr. Mahama Wedraogo, I think more and more it seems as if he's becoming a member of both African Union and UNESCO, because we are really together doing a lot of interesting work. And a special word of welcome to all the invited guests and experts or speakers that will be coming up later. This is really a fascinating moment for me because it gives us an opportunity to, dive into issues probably that we've not yet discussed. But I hope we are not just going to talk about them. We are going to ensure that by the time we get to the end of this webinar, we'll be looking at measures, mechanisms that will really help us to move to another level. I believe my colleague Jaya has very well set the stage. There isn't so much that I can add, given the extent to which he's been able to walk us through on the links between biodiversity and pandemics, and for which probably we are not willing to really speak to. In Africa, biodiversity presents an important heritage. We all know that, and this is really one of the important area of work that UNESCO to a large extent champions. And we know this heritage has huge socioeconomic and cultural functions. With many livelihoods tied to natural resources such as forests, non-timber forest products, agriculture, freshwater resources, etc., the conservation of biodiversity and their ecosystem services is one mainstream opportunity for achieving many targets of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063. Here in Africa in particular, I believe this is an area where we must begin to pay closer attention, because when you talk about biodiversity, you talk about the huge opportunities which probably neglected but exist in Africa. How can we use this to turn around development trajectory? With many livelihoods tied to natural resources, I believe we then have to begin to look at how this development change can happen. As you are aware, tens of thousands of species are already condemned to extinction, largely due to the destruction of habitat. This loss of biodiversity is caused mainly by economic and demographic factors, and especially by the increasing demand for space and biological resources needed to sustain global production and the growth of human population, its consumption, and its trade. And here, I believe a balance has to be struck. But to really strike this balance, there is always one thing that is very missing, and this is the research and the communication of the findings to really inform policy, to help governments understand the kind of choices they are making. Because it can be so very easy when one operator or another comes with something that looks in the short term attractive. And the only way we can help with policy discussion is when we are able to accompany governments to see the long-term effects. And unless this becomes a way of engaging with governments, there would be a lot of decisions taken not based on facts and evidence, but really provided through anecdotal evidence. And in most cases, it's about economy. It's about now. It's not about 10, 15, 20 years ahead. So I hope that coming together.
Finally connected.
Yes, Dr. Mahama, yes, finally connected. Yes, thank you so much. I mean, now the floor is yours. You are on right time.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished participant, the Assistant DG Sciences, Dr. Shamila, the Regional Director, UNESCO Office, Nairobi. It's my pleasure to really be here in this webinar. And of course, we want to thank UNESCO for organizing it and inviting the Commission. I bring you greeting from Commissioner of Human Resources, Science and Technology, Her Excellency Professor Sarah Anyang Akpo. She would have liked to be here personally in attendance to this webinar. For time immemorial, Africa has relied on biodiversity, the abundance in genetic resources on plants, animals, including, of course, food, health, and shelter. Gathering, hunting, and farming, whether it's crops, animals, fish, all have an impact on biodiversity. But what is more worrisome is our increased appetite for resources. For example, it's noted that more than 60 billion tons of renewable and non-renewable resources are extracted globally each year, up nearly 100% since 1980. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, in its 2019 report, is really emphatic on the deterioration of biodiversity. 75% of terrestrial environment are severely altered to date by human action. For marine environment, it's 66% and still ongoing. The loss of genetic diversity contribute to ecosystem degradation, thus compromising the complexity of the overall system and making it vulnerable for new diseases outbreak to thrive in both human and other species, including, of course, the zoonotic diseases. Biodiversity is an important source of genetic resources for the development of many treatments, whether it is vaccine and a range of biotechnology products used in both modern and traditional medicine, as well as agriculture and industry. The organic COVID from Madagascar is an example of medicine coming out of our biodiversity. In the African context, clearly more than 80% of the population use traditional medicine as mean for therapies. It is therefore incumbent on technology to support the stakeholders with evidence-based policies, program and regulatory tools, development and implementation for conservation, protection, and responsible and sustainable economic exploitation of the biodiversity that we have. Cognizance of the role that Earth observation, satellite communication, navigation, and positioning play in achieving situational analysis, monitoring, and prevention of biodiversity degradation, the African Union Commission deployed GMS and Africa in collaboration with the EU has a continental program using these space sciences to deliver services for water and natural resources, sustainable management, as well as for marine and coastal area. The program involves 122 African institutions from 44 countries. On a larger scale, the program will use Earth observation for the monitoring of climate variability and change, natural and human-induced disasters, food security and rural development, conflict and political crisis, infrastructure for territorial development, and health management. During the ministerial session that took place in April, 30th of April 2020, the minister took two decisions, among, of course, a certain number of decisions that they deliberated on. The first one is to leverage the critical role that space science, technology, and innovation, especially Earth observation system and geographic information system, to monitor disease outbreaks and provide technology solutions to support evidence-based decision making to mitigate pandemics. And secondly, they requested, in fact, they urged the stakeholders, including the Commission, UNESCO, and development partners to carry out socio-economic and environmental impact evaluation and assessment, and also develop response strategies for COVID-19 and Ebola outbreaks. So what role is the AU playing in the implementation of the regulatory aspect of biodiversity? Because this is a very important question that I intend to address as I am moving toward closing this intervention. As you are aware, the Convention on Biological Diversity stands as a landmark in international law, with its goals so comprehensive in dealing with issues so vital to the future of humanity. The CBD, with its 3 goals, recognizes for the first time that the conservation of biological diversity is a common concern of humankind and is an integral part of the development process. To date, 50 African countries are party to the CBD from a global of 196. The rich and unique heritage of biodiversity and traditional knowledge associated to biodiversity have, however, not been utilized to its potential. Taking into account Africa's huge stake in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, the African region has indeed been an important group in the CBD negotiation. The Commission has served in coordinating the African group, has a convener, and also has a secretariat during several and of the negotiation, where the implementation of the CBD protocols are concerned. The AU member states also have been technically supported throughout the lengthy process of the negotiation and adoption of 2 key protocols under the CBD, the Nagoya Protocol and Access and Benefit Sharing, and the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol to the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Guidelines, model laws have all been developed to support the member states and to ensure harmonized regional standards based on agreed common priorities and positions. With regard to biodiversity and health, it is to be recalled that the 12th and 13th Conference of the Parties have discussed the interlinkages whereby the subsidiary body on scientific and technological advice gave its guidance to integrating biodiversity consideration into the One Health approach and had invited further collaborative work through the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health. The African Union Commission will hence remain engaged to support the African group in such thematic issues, highlighting the relevance and priorities for the region. And I'm quite convinced that the outcome of this meeting will contribute to further our action towards supporting the African group so that we can ensure the safe use of our biodiversity to prevent the pandemic that this world is facing. I thank you for your patience in listening to me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mahama, and we look forward to work with your department, with your commission on the conservation of biodiversity. And I would like to recognize the UN Environment Regional Director, Dr. Juliet. She's just joined. I think it's now time for us to listen from our UN Environment Regional Director. Juliet, the floor is yours.
Jaya, if you don't mind, I would like to say welcome to my African sister.
Yeah, please, Shamila, please.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the Mahama Ouedraogo, our strategic partner of the African Union, with whom we are working very closely and to whom we really would like to thank for the participation day and especially providing a cohesive Africa program that we can, all of us, work together. My dear sister Juliet, to Juliet Diao, for those who do not know her, I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with her for years now. Dr. Juliet is the ex-minister of her country, Benin, where she has served in different advisory positions and ministerial roles. The preservation of Africa's forests is at her heart. She is the first woman forestier on the African continent out of 54 African countries. We owe a lot to this lady who has promoted women empowerment on the African continent, who has promoted the scientific monitoring of the environment, and who has ensured that every forest and every tree has been preserved. So thank you, Dr. Juliet. We are honored to have you with us. I am so happy to see you. And thank you for honoring us with your presence.
Thank you very much for overstating, Shamila. Good afternoon and good morning, colleagues and distinguished guests. Good afternoon. I'm very privileged and humbled to be able to join you today during this very important webinar to reflect on our relationship with the nature. We are all living in a very challenging and unprecedented times. The advent of COVID-19 has disrupted all aspects of our life, from health and social interactions, schooling and working, to economic stand, leading to financial recession. The year 2020 was what we in the environment sector call the super year for nature. This marked the dawning of a new commitment to conserving biodiversity and ecosystems. As you know, you may know, 10 years ago, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity adopted the 2020 Biodiversity Strategic Plan and Targets, which are also known as the Aichi target. At the time, we thought 2020 was far enough for the world to achieve Aichi biodiversity goals and targets. But as scientific assessment have shown, we didn't achieve most of the targets. Instead, we oversaw millions of species being taken on the brink of our distinction, and more species being exploited at a rate never witnessed before. This is why 2020 was an important year, a year to renew our commitment to living in harmony with nature. But all is not lost. We just received a wake-up call, reminding us that we need to take urgent action. The process of developing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will continue once COVID-19 pandemic has been contained. Ladies and gentlemen, the messages I would like really to pass on are the following. Number one, biodiversity is essential for sustainable development and human well-being. Without effective measure to conserve biodiversity and use of its resources in a sustainable manner, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development will not be achievable. Number two, at the core of the sustainable biodiversity conservation is science knowledge, including the wealth in Africa of indigenous and local knowledge about biodiversity and ecosystem, which has enabled sustainable coexistence between its people, African people, and nature for centuries. Number three, though there are many examples of success on innovation in conservation of Africa's biodiversity, we continue to experience unprecedented rate of population growth infrastructure development, such as road and railways, and ports, leading to continuous decline in biodiversity with ongoing losses of species. Fourth, the flare of zoonotic disease is not new in the continent. On the continent, the Ebola virus, though now relatively contained, is vividly still with us. Our interaction with nature goes to very basics, as millions of communities directly depend on nature for their livelihood. This poses high risk to our population in case of zoonotic diseases. Lastly, climate change, rapid growth or population growth, illicit exploitation of and illegal trade in wildlife, and invasive alien species are top drivers of biodiversity loss in Africa. Nevertheless, there is a glimpse of hope for Africa from the restoration efforts and the expansion and better management of protected areas. But amidst COVID-19 pandemic are also positive moments. The world has been forced to pause and reflect on how we interact with nature. The temporal lull in activities, especially travel, manufacturing, has seen skies of many cities clear up. For the first time, the many city dwellers can see clear blue skies. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it is my hope that this webinar will provide us with an opportunity to digest this reality, however unpalatable it might be. We must confront this and hopefully take action to avert future pandemics. While we may not take the same action, it will be collective responsibility for our individual and differentiate actions that will lead to meaningful change. The question is whether we will learn from this pandemic or we will go back to our wanton and destructive ways that have left us vulnerable. Will we value nature? In which ways? Or will we continue destroying nature, and at what cost? Can we really afford to pay that cost? Thank you very much, and I look forward to fruitful discussion during this webinar. I thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juliet. I mean, of course, yeah, we are sitting next to each other in the compound. I mean, we are already working on the water security. We'll come back to you on biodiversity issues also. I mean, already UNEP is providing a lot of support for us, and we'll work together on this subject also. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Now I could see that, I mean, our UNESCO regional director, Adherence, is back and she has joined, and I would like to ask her to complete her speech. I mean,
well,
Adherence?
thank you very much. You know, at this point in time, I do not want to keep the meeting on what would have otherwise been an opening statement. Listening to Mahama and then listening to my sister Juliet, I believe everything has been said. I would simply just want to re-echo some of the issues that have been raised, which essentially would require that we rethink our position in how to build this harmony between nature and human beings. We cannot continue in this way. I think I left off where I was saying most of the time policies are not informed by research findings. And if research do happen, they tend not to really be discussed with policymakers. And policymakers then are left on their own to I wouldn't want to give a description to that, but on their own to make decisions based on anecdotal evidence, evidence that would be in the interest of whoever wants to exploit the situation and not necessarily looking beyond the here and now. And given the very graphic description we have heard from Juliet, from Dr. Mahama, it's clear that it's about time that in Africa, our policymakers use evidence, facts from research to back decisions that they make. The long-term benefits of the decisions and policies they make should really override immediate gratification of resources that may be only for personal, for individual, or just for a short term. And the other issue that I would really want to add is that we have to more and more be very conscious of the fact that most of the calamity that has really created the lockdown is directly or indirectly related to the behavioral aspect of the interaction between man and nature. And I think, like I said, this is a wonderful opportunity. Let us not just stop at the point of talking about it. It is not as if our scientists are not aware of it. It's about time that the scientists engage better with policymakers who may not have all the facts, and probably it's an opportunity not only to present the facts, but to help them and to understand the consequences of not acting in the right way. Let me leave it at that so that the conversation will flow. Initially, it was simply for me to invite, welcome all of you, and to appreciate the fact that this is a moment which, if used properly, would help us. And it's building up because, like I mentioned, we have an ADG who is so passionate about building this harmony. We have a continent that is really endowed with a lot of riches, including that of biodiversity. Unfortunately, because of lack of adequate engagement through research, we tend to allow, situations to undermine the wealth that has really been given us as a continent. And biodiversity is one of them, rich in a lot of ways, that touches on food security, that really touches on health-related issues, that touches on poverty eradication. So, I mean, as I go on, it really, brings together all of what we have in the SDGs. We also have it as a means of ensuring that we educate our people better. We educate young people so that they value the biodiversity and they see the links with preservation of it to socioeconomic development. I also want to really conclude by saying that this pandemic of COVID-19, as everybody has alluded to, is just one of the pandemics which really would recur, and it would continue to be more aggressive unless we begin to learn and draw lessons from where we're coming from and why we are where we are, rather than allow ourselves to really take lightly the situation we are in. Do we want to see a future that is more vibrant, or do we want to really begin to start the countdown of the extinction of the human species? It's a choice we have to make. And unless we put it bluntly, policymakers may not see the danger of some of the choices they make. Modernization, yes. Materialism, yes. But it should not be at the cost of humanity. And with those few words, I want to thank you all again, especially my good friend, the Minister Jandak. I hope we will have an opportunity to also exchange, because it's been almost 16 years we've not really met, but I can recall we did great things that put Rwanda on the map even today, in terms of the decision that she took to really make the right choices for the education system in Rwanda. I hope with the same dynamism and the same, if I can say boldness, to confront the president and say, Mr. President, this is the way to go. Let us pursue it. I thank you very much. I know between all these powerful ladies, Africa is in safe hands.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antares. Without delaying further, I would like to invite Shamila, our ADG, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, to give her special remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaya. And thank you very much to our regional. Thank you, Jaya, for bringing us together. Thank you to Dr. Antares Njata for organizing this meeting and for the inspiring speech you've given us, inspiring speech of Dr. Juliet Biao, as well as that of our colleague, Dr. Mahama Udraogo. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take a very different tone in my presentation. We have heard the role of biodiversity as our living fabric of the African continent. But I want to take you further down the road to understand how this crisis has shown us in a very painful way our global dependencies and interconnections. We have heard about guarding humanity, but I'm going to plead for the safeguarding of the biodiversity, the plants, the animals, and the Mother Earth that Africa depends on. Our common destiny as human beings living on Earth is irreversibly linked. We need each other. We need Mother Earth. And this observation must now unite us and bring us together, no matter how painful it is. We are totally interdependent on the healthy biodiversity for our own health, for our economy, for our food, for our well-being. Our responsibility is to care for life on Earth and to enable the conditions for its transmission to future generations. So where are we today? What are the lessons we have learned from this situation? What can we offer future generations to avoid such a pandemic in the future? Or if there are global threats, what do we do? What are the opportunities that we have at hand to accelerate the transformation, the behavioral changes we need for a more sustainable and fairer world, and that of Agenda 2030, but Africa's Agenda 2063. So here I am going to talk to you in a very different way and a different spirit. Yes, we need the science monitoring of the environment, as Dr. Juliet Biao and Dr. Antares has indicated. Even Dr. Mahama has called upon us for science monitoring of the environment. So UNESCO is offering these science programs to understand the declining biodiversity in collaboration with UNEP and all the other partners. We have unique designated sites in Africa. These are called the Man and the Biosphere Sites. These sites designated by international experts bring together the scientific monitoring of the environment, empowerment of people, conservation, preservation, and restoration of Mother Earth and our biodiversity. It also enables us to enhance our relationship between people and nature by combining the natural, the social science, the cultural sciences. This program of the Man and the Biosphere improves human livelihoods and safeguards our natural managed ecosystems. At the same time, we have to understand that these UNESCO biosphere reserves, the network of 700 biosphere reserves in 122 countries, are the national jurisdiction of member states. These are testing grounds of interdisciplinary approaches to understanding and managing the changes of our relationship with nature, our social ecological systems, and what nature is telling us, including how we can prevent the biodiversity decline. These world networks of biosphere reserves is really an interactive network. And what do we have in Africa? We have almost 80 biosphere reserves across the continent, which is home to almost 20 million people. And these biosphere reserves in Africa are extremely crucial today if we want to understand how they contribute to Africa's people's development. These biosphere reserves in Africa are also very important because they prevent conflicts between nations. We have 3 transboundary biosphere reserves, but these biosphere reserves are also important for other matters, and that is nominated by UNESCO and the Man and Biosphere Council. It gives countries an opportunity to demonstrate that it's possible to live in harmony with nature. It's possible to improve the conditions for conservation of biodiversity, and it's possible to achieve a better match between conservation, preservation, scientific research, training, ecological monitoring, and sustainable socio-economic, socio-cultural values for Africa's development. One example is Lake Chad. Around Lake Chad, 40 million people depend upon its resources. The program put in place by UNESCO, UNEP, and the African Development Bank, called the Biosphere Project, is providing and strengthening capacities of 5 of the Lake Chad member states to safeguard and sustainably manage the hydrological, biological, and cultural resources of Lake Chad. This is extremely important to provide also cooperation across the boundaries and the borders. This project is really essential to promote collaboration between member states. UNESCO was assigned the technical support unit, and this technical support unit, could somebody please mute? Can someone please mute? Thank you. Please mute. Thank you. So together with the Biopalt program, in which we are working with UNEP, UNDP, and other partners across Africa, UNESCO was also assigned the technical support unit of the Intergovernmental Program on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. As Dr. Biao rightly pointed out, bringing together indigenous knowledge people and local knowledge systems is extremely important to understanding and mitigating the local threats to living in harmony with nature. So we are supporting the Biosphere Reserve networks across Africa, not only through programs like the Biopalt program, where women are also being empowered to produce spirulina in a sustainable manner in collaboration with other partners, in all due respect for the environment. But we are also together with UNEP promoting the Great Ape Survival Project. This is a unique alliance of nearly 100 national governments, conservationists, and organizations across the world to promote and preserve the great apes. We are very pleased and delighted to inform that the Gombe Masito Ugala Biosphere was recognized as a biosphere reserve in Tanzania. You will all recall that this is where Dr. Jane Goodall began pioneering study of the wild chimpanzees. Dear colleagues, we need to promote a coalition for nature and to valorize all living things on Earth. So our role is to promote this new alliance between people and nature. We need to support the diversity of life across the world. We need to be able to reconnect humans and nature. We need to reorganize our relationship with nature and ecosystem services. We need to conserve, preserve, and restore the harmony of ecosystem services. But through this, we can only do so if we amplify the voice of youth, if we promote solidarity and equity between generations. That is why the Man and the Biosphere Reserves program, the Man and the Biosphere network of biosphere reserves, is also promoting what is called the Youth Biodiversity Platforms to strengthen and to promote collaboration, to promote training among the youth so that they can restore our biodiversity. And we need to amplify then this intergenerational equity to protect living things for future generations. I therefore thank you all. Let's enable this transmission of the value of nature and look forward to a successful webinar with all of you. Let's conserve, preserve, restore, and help, and to avert the emergence of future pandemics. Thank you very much.
To your friends. If we push these meetings over to you,
Thank you very much, Shamila. I request everyone to mute their mic. Can everyone mute their mic? I invite my regional director, Antares, to invite the minister. Can I request everyone to mute their mic, please? Please. Somebody has unmuted their mic. Can you please mute it? Antares.
I think it's this person who is Emo. Who is Emo?
Did you people see the report of the meeting with the partners?
Mohammed Udraogo, please mute your mic.
Did you see the table? Did you see the table?
Mohammed.
That's what I'm saying. It's not forward like this. Yes.
Mahama.
This guy
Mute. Can somebody mute him then? Anyway, thank you very much. I believe, Andrew, you can help us with the African Union to mute Dr. Wadrogu. I think this is so exciting. You know, I mean, Jaya, let me thank you because you have been very careful in choosing some powerful women. And like I started saying, even with the excitement, it dates back many, many, many years. Dr. Jandak would tell you how we really navigated to really bring Rwanda on the map at a time when there were lots of doubts. And I still remember the fact that even though there were doubts by the World Bank, there were doubts by some of these other agencies on the route that we wanted to take. And that was actually calling for an uninterrupted basic education for all. And in the very pessimistic way of the World Bank's analysis, they felt, oh, Rwanda, you are just out of a crisis. How can you muster this courage? But today, all over the world, Rwanda is considered as a best practice. But the author of that best practice, I must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, has been Dr. Jandak. She is dynamic, and I am sure, as we are talking about championing another cause, especially one that can really turn around our socioeconomic development through the harmony between nature and man, we have a champion. And we would again call upon Rwanda through her leadership for us to champion this cause, because I don't want this webinar to end in just talking about the issues. We want action. And she had proven to be an action person. Shamila is an action person. Juliet is an action person. Oh my God, I don't want to call myself an action person, but I know that this minister should really be our champion. And over to you, Jandak. I may not have said so much, but let me reserve it. And just to say you are a champion among champions. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, my sister Therese. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you once again. Distinguished panelists and speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and I extend my warm greetings from Kigali. It is a pleasure to be part of this important discussion on the role of biodiversity in preventing future pandemics in Africa. This webinar comes at an important time as the world faces numerous challenges, including biodiversity and habitat loss, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the last 2 decades, we have witnessed several international health crises, including Lassa fever, Ebola, among others, as well as COVID-19. It is only right to be concerned about future pandemics that now seem almost inevitable. The zoonotic nature of this disease forces us to rethink how we manage our biodiversity. Growing evidence suggests that most, if not all, of these epidemics and have resulted from our behavior toward biodiversity, especially wildlife and land use. This is just as true in Africa as it is elsewhere. Just a few days ago, Rwanda joined the rest of international community to celebrate World Environment Day under the theme Biodiversity, Time for Nature. This year's theme is a clear wake-up call for humanity. The truth remains way and reverse the trend of biodiversity loss. This is a wake-up call from the nature. However, we continue to witness the unprecedented impact of human activities on biodiversity and our climate. According to a recent report from and ecosystem services, 1 million plant and animal species face extinction over the next 10 years. 10 years from now is 2030. If nothing is done to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss. The tropical region alone lost 12 million hectares of forest cover in 2018, the fourth highest annual loss since record keeping began in 2001. Of great concern is the disappearance of 3.7 million hectares of primary rainforest globally. Such huge destruction of the nature world can no longer continue if we are to stand a chance of addressing climate change and preventing future pandemics. In Rwanda, we are building a green and climate resilient nation that values and supports its biodiversity. We are signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity and its affiliated protocols and have a number of instruments to protect biodiversity, including a law on national plan. Over the last 15 years, Rwanda has established 2 new national parks to safeguard wildlife and adopted laws protecting remnant natural forests and gallery forests countrywide. Today, 30.4% of the country is covered with forests and protected areas. Rwanda also understands the value of transboundary collaboration to address health and environment challenges, both regionally and at international level. We are pleased to be part of ongoing negotiations on the post-2020 biodiversity framework, and we are revising our biodiversity law to meet the requirements of any new agreement reached at the upcoming Convention on Biological Diversity COP15. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also mobilizing financial resources for biodiversity conservation and restoration and aim to reach 2% of GDP by 2030, up from the current 0.9%. We are working with our amazing partners to prevent the extinction of threatened species, including the mountain gorillas, and restore species of ecological importance, such as the eastern black rhino and lion. These efforts are underpinned by the adoption of biosafety legal instruments. Without a doubt, there is a strong connection between the pandemic and the way we treat our environment and our biodiversity in particular. That is why human-wildlife conflict, the wildlife trade, habitat loss, including deforestation, pollution, invasive species, and other cascading environmental challenges must be met head-on across the continent. If we value biodiversity and respect nature, we stand a chance of achieving prosperity that can be sustained for generations to come. We know this is not an easy task, but together as one, we are committed to it nonetheless. Our lives depend on the invaluable services provided by biodiversity and nature. The air we breathe, the water we drink, food security, nature-based medicines, tourism revenues, and our livelihoods all come from nature. We totally depend on nature. We need to learn from the challenges we are facing, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, to share lessons and craft responses together that prevent and sharpen our resilience to future pandemics. This can only be achieved if we work together and put nature at the heart of everything we do. Because without us, nature will survive. But as human beings, we cannot survive without nature. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar. Today's discussion has given us the opportunity to reflect on our relationship with biodiversity and nature. I'm convinced that such open dialogues lead to tangible action that protects and enhances biodiversity, preserves the unique natural beauty that our continent has been blessed with, and promotes good health for people and the planet. I wish you all fruitful discussions, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Murakoze cyane.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Excellency. We very much appreciate your presence here, and also we look forward for your kind support. And under your leadership, we wanted to see the Center for Excellence in Biodiversity and Natural Resources Management to become UNESCO Category 2 Center. I think my director, Antares, would like to say something. Antares.
No, I think I had used sign language just to appreciate her. And I think I really will go with you that we will create a center of excellence in Rwanda, and through her mobilize other environment ministers along with UNEP, along with our ADG, who should really begin to link it with her initiative on open science, that needs to also inform how we appreciate nature and how nature is so very valuable. Your message has been wonderful, and I hope the experts will continue mining it so that we move from here to something more tangible. Thank you so very much. As soon as the lockdown is eased, I'll be there for us to have a face-to-face conversation. And I'll
Welcome to
bring along
Rwanda.
my friend Juliet.
And welcome to Rwanda. And we are welcoming the idea of having the Center of Excellence in Rwanda. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, everyone. Now, with this, we'll come to the end of first session, and the next session, it will be a scientific session where I will request Professor Bath to moderate the session. Professor Bath.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much, Jaya, and thank you to everybody, all these wonderful speakers. I'm really honored to be here today, and we have a really wonderful set of speakers, expert speakers that are invited for people. And what we did is we asked some of our these young junior researchers at the University of Rwanda to introduce these speakers. And so I would like to welcome, first of all, Apendo Minji. He's one of our biologists. He's a frog expert. He's the future for biodiversity conservation here in Rwanda and in the continent. And he's going to introduce our next two speakers for us. So Mapendo, I invite you to take over here and welcome our next two speakers.
Thank you very much, Professor Beth, and Director of the Center of Excellence in Biodiversity and Nature Conservation in Rwanda. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Aida Chuni Sanchez, who is going to be our next speaker. Dr. Aida has a PhD in environmental sciences, and she has been working as a postdoctoral researcher in a number of universities in Europe. To list a few: the University of Copenhagen, the University of York, the University of College London, and the University of Copenhagen in Europe. Her research interests currently focus on tropical forest ecology, carbon stocks, forest use by local communities, and local communities' adaptation to climate change. A very good, interesting part about Dr. Aida is that she has recently been awarded the L'Oreal Women in Science UK Award on Sustainable Development. Our next speaker after Dr. Aida will be Dr. Fola Babalola, who will be presenting about the role of community conservation in avoiding the next pandemic. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Fola, a PhD holder in forest economics, and he is also a senior lecturer and researcher at the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. And also he is a senior consultant to FAO, working on small-scale forest enterprise in Africa. Dr. Fola is a specialist in forest socioeconomics, and he is focusing his research on the interdependence of forest and people, seeing how these affects community livelihoods. Also, interestingly, Dr. Fola has started a non-governmental organization which is called Save Sahara Network. This NGO is focusing on saving nature and empowering people at grassroots. Thank you. Those will be our next two speakers.
Hi, Mapendo. Can you hear? Everybody can see this?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yes.
Great. Yeah,
Yes,
let me just put the slideshow then. Can you all see my screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
see your screen. You can turn into presentation mode.
Yes, it's coming. Sorry, I have very bad internet where I'm staying at the moment. So good afternoon, everybody. And it's an honor to be here and I'm very pleased. So I'll try to be brief on my scientific inputs. I've been working on tropical forests in Africa for the past 10 years. So I hope I'm on issues related at the interface between ecology and social sciences. So I hope I can provide some insights for the biodiversity and preventing future pandemics in Africa that we are talking about today. So I'm currently based at the University of York in the UK, but I'm also a visiting scholar at the University of Colorado in US. So let me start by acknowledging that our health is related to the health of animals and also the health of environment. But this is an approach that is increasingly recognized as a One Health. And I just wanted to say that this is not really new. The Greek physician Hippocrates already promoted the idea that public health depends on a clean environment. And this was the work done on how polluted air and water affected human health and well-being. So this is I think we've known that our health is related to environment for a long time as humans. So let me talk today about tropical forests. And I want you to pause there for like just 30 seconds and think what tropical forests provide to us humans and how this affects our health and our well-being. And I guess if you think about tropical forests, most people first think about timber and maybe firewood. But actually the most important thing tropical forests provide us is actually food. So tropical forests provide different types of food. One of them is bushmeat, as you can see here in the photo on the slide. And bushmeat, in this case, they are small carcasses of duikers and monkeys. It's a photo taken in a market in DRC in Kindu. And bushmeat is actually very important to humans in many parts of the world because it's a source of protein, but very importantly, it's a source of iron as well. So it helps prevent anemia. Also, tropical forests provide us with vegetables and fruits that are rich in nutrients, and they're particularly important in times of crop failure. So there was major droughts and major floods that destroy crops. And also forests are important because for pastoralist communities, when the grass gets dry, maybe during droughts, they can also turn to forests to get fodder for their animals. And here I wanted to quote a colleague that published a study about Madagascar that showed that if households in Madagascar in the rural areas were not able to get bushmeat to feed the children will have a 30% higher risk of anemia. And of those of you that don't know, anemia can actually increase the risk of death related to infectious diseases. It reduces the IQ and the learning in children, and it actually can reduce the lifelong capacity for physical activity. So children that are deprived by iron, and in some cases coming from bushmeat, actually we are condemning them to have a different life forever just because of these reduced nutrients and protein when they were young. Just to highlight how important is in some part of the world, the people have access to this bushmeat and the wild fruits and vegetables, especially during droughts. So if we think about forests as well, another thing that may come up to your mind is medicinal plants, because a lot of households, especially in Africa, rely on medicinal plants for medicine. This is not just because they're cheaper than sometimes other types of medicine, but usually they're also more easily available in rural areas where there's few health centers or pharmacies, or even the health centers that are there have actually no medicine to be offered for. And sometimes it's also for cultural preferences, especially in areas where most of the doctors are male. Some females prefer to go to use traditional medicine because of that reason. So of course, going back to the same thing, healthy people that are maybe not affected for malaria, for example, are less susceptible to other diseases. So these medicinal plants coming from forests are very important. And another point I wanted to make is that forests also provide income to people, not just in terms of timber, as you can see in the top photo, but also in terms of non-timber forest products. And non-timber forest products includes lots of things, from firewood and charcoal, but also to food, seeds, and medicine, as you can see in the bottom photo. And just to highlight how important this is for people, because this money that they get from selling forest products, they may use to buy food, to make them healthy, or also pay for healthcare. So just an example from Tanzania this time. In the Eastern Arc Mountains in Tanzania, annual value of timber is about 10 million US dollar, and that of charcoal trade is 14 million. So you can see how many people might be dependent on having an income related to this forest trade. And another example, this time from Ghana, the medicinal plant trade in the 3 biggest urban centers in Ghana, it's estimated at nearly 8 million. So you can also see how big is this trade of forest products and how it's important for some communities to make a living and to pay for food and also healthcare. And I just wanted to say that some of these products not just reach country level markets or regional markets, but they also trade it internationally. So I pick up 3 examples. One of them on the left is the rhinodendron oil. This is a rainforest tree. The oil is used for cooking and is exported internationally. The second example is shea butter, which is a tree found in the African savanna in West Africa, also used in cosmetics, widely exported internationally. And the third one is amarula, which is an alcoholic drink made with the fruit from the Southern Africa savanna, which is also exported internationally. So in this case, the source of income is much larger because of these international markets that these products reach. So talking about the indirect benefits from the forest and how these affect human health, I want to highlight just a few more of them. So one of them is water supply and quality. You know, the forests regulate water flow and also the quality of water that humans use for drinking, but also maybe for irrigation or other purposes. They provide pollinators. And I know in Africa, this is maybe not so big yet, but I can tell you that in some part of the world, this is a very, very big benefit from forests. For example, in California, in US, where a lot of the forests have been gone by now, some of the farmers there have actually to pay to import bees from Australia. Even Australia, they import the bees so they can pollinate the crops at the time of the year that it's needed. So, you know, imagine if that was to happen in the African continent, it would cost billions of dollars to get pollinators from elsewhere. So don't forget the value of having these pollinators that pollinate our crops, and therefore we have food, better food and healthier people. Of course, forests also help regulate pests on crops because some of the insects and other, for example, birds that feed on some of the pests are found in the forest. They also contribute to less soil erosion and landslides, very important also for crops. This is very important in mountain areas. And they regulate clean air and local climate. And I'll come back to that one a little bit later on. And I just wanted to briefly highlight as well how in urban areas, having green spaces or small forest patches are also very important for mental health. And there's a few studies that have shown that, especially for people with depression and having some mental discapacities. So what is the problem with our tropical forest? And I really liked this photo because if you remember the other one I put up about the forest, it was this kind of green patch. It looked like a green carpet. But when we destroy the forest, it looks like this. There's a lot of gaps, and we can already see here that the water here has been polluted, it's full of sediment. And we can see there's a lot more sun coming in. And imagine if this was a bigger patch where there would be maybe the monkeys moving from one tree to the other. So obviously, if the monkeys are passing the fields of the humans have in the middle, that would cause problems in terms of destroying the crops, but maybe also bringing the diseases closer to humans as they're moving in their environment. So how destroying forests has a lot of effects on us. So before we go to how we destroy forests, I wanted to briefly mention what are empty forests. So empty forests are forests that look normal. We see the big trees are still out there. The problem is that there's no wildlife or very little wildlife. And this also has a big effect on humans. So the first one you may think of is, of course, empty forests. If there's no wildlife, there'll be empty stomachs because of all these people that rely on bushmeat for a source of protein. But I want to take it to another level because actually removing the animals also has a long-term effect on the forest because these animals, many of them disperse the seeds around. Just think about elephants, for example, how many seeds they disperse and how far they travel. So removing the wildlife in forests has effects on the structure of the forest over time and tree regeneration. And also very important, as is been shown for Brazil, it can also have an effect on vector-borne diseases. So all these animals that were used by, let's say, malaria mosquitoes before, as the animals are not out there anymore, they actually go and look for humans to feed on instead. So it also has a direct effect to moving the wildlife from the forest to have more malaria incidents in the areas nearby. Another problem is that when the forests get destroyed, as I said, the wildlife moves around looking for food and habitat and destroy the crops and can also transmit the diseases to humans. Of course, if there's less healthy forests around, we have fewer medicinal plants, fewer wild foods to sustain our humans, and also less sources of income. There's also the potential loss of sources for pharmaceuticals that might help us maybe fight, for example, the COVID-19 if the forest is gone, but also the potential losses of wild crop relatives, better adapted to climatic changes or pests. And I want to stop here for a second, and hopefully you all like coffee, like I do. So for those of you that don't know, the coffee is found at high elevations on mountains, and it's grown at the edges of mountain forests. So what happens is that with global warming, mountains are getting warmer. And therefore, some of the pests found on lower elevations are moving to higher elevations. So it's actually predicted that the price of coffee will increase in the future because of this problem, because of most pests arriving at the lower elevations of the altitudinal range where coffee is grown. So what about if by destroying the natural forests, like the forests of Ethiopia, where we have a lot of wild coffee relatives, we're destroying these potential coffee varieties that would allow us to have coffee in the future. So this is another problem when we destroy forests, that we are not just destroying and affecting what we have at the moment, we're also affecting the chances we have in the future. Just a little bit more of the sad news on what happens when we destroy forests. As I said before, forests regulate water flow and quality. So when we destroy forests and there's more sediments on water, and also more stagnation in water, or maybe lower flow, that has an effect on more diarrheal diseases and also more malaria. Also, there's less pollination, control of pests, and maybe even more landslides because of the forests are gone, especially at high elevations. And another big problem is that when we destroy forests, especially when they're burned, there's a lot more pollution going to the air. And actually at large scales, these can be very, very big. As we've seen from Southeast Asia, there's these huge smoke clouds that can travel long distances. So for example, they travel from Indonesia to Singapore, that it's like crossing the Pacific Ocean. And the quality of the air in Singapore city was so bad that they had to recommend people staying at home. And this was created elsewhere, but it affected them. So it's just to show how destroying forests especially can have an effect on air pollution that can travel lots of miles and affect populations elsewhere. And just two more points. One is on the effects of local climate that I'm going to go talk about in a second, and also the global climate. And this is because tropical forests store 1/3 of the carbon that we have in the biosphere. So when we destroy these forests, not only the trees stop growing and cleaning the air as they do the photosynthesis, they're actually also releasing all the carbon that they had stored in their trunks, their branches, and their roots back to the atmosphere. So contributing to more global warming, which we all know also has a negative effect on us. So let me give you an example from Mount Kenya. So this is a beautiful forest, a mountain forest in Mount Kenya. And if you pay attention to this photo, you will see that the trees are pretty large for being at high elevations where it's relatively cold. But also, if you look at the left trunk, the tree has a lot of mosses and epiphytes attached to it, this green thing that you can see here. And this is because this is a cloud forest. So what happens is that when the clouds pass by, or we can call, when you are inside the cloud, we call it fog. So when the fog passes by, the leaves of the trees, the branches, but also the mosses of the trunk are actually capturing little water from the droplets of the clouds, condensing it and increasing the, dripping it to the soil, and that makes the area more humid than if there was no forest. So let me tell you how it works. So the left diagram, this would be Mount Kenya a few years ago. So we had a lot of forest, and this forest was trapping the water from the fog and dripping it into the ground to have more groundwater. But part of this water was also evaporated, and it contributed into making rain. So it kind of maintained this cloud forest on top of the mountain, maintained a slightly more humid microclimate than if there was no forest there. So what happened is that the trees have been destroyed, so there's less forest in Mount Kenya. Therefore, the forest can capture less fog, even if there was the same. Also, because of global warming, there's a little bit less fog. And the problem is that because there's less forest and less water in the canopy that can get evaporated, it means that there's less rain as well. And of course, we add the problem that we are also extracting more water because of increased human populations. So this is pretty sad news for not just biodiversity, but also for us humans. So it's been estimated by, so this is on the, let me explain it first. The top picture is a satellite image from deforestation in Mount Kenya. So the Mount Kenya would be the white part in the center and forest is around it. And the pink color is where the forest has been gone between 2000 and 2010. And you could think that it's not a lot. I mean, we only see a few pink patches, but actually these pink patches has a big effect on what happens in this forest and in this mountain. So there was a report done by UNEP in 2012, which showed that these little pink patches had caused Kenya a loss of $33 million US. Why? Because there was less water flowing during the dry season and therefore reduced revenues from irrigation, agriculture, from hydropower and also from inland fisheries, and also increased cost to treat this water for potable use because it had a lot more sediments, and also increased malaria prevalence, which has a cost as well in society trying to treat. In Kenya, malaria treatment is free, so it costs a government as well a lot of money to treat all these extra people that now have malaria. So the idea is that by destroying the forest, it's actually the little short-term benefit of maybe selling the timber of the trees for charcoal or whatever we are selling it for. It has a less value than what we would have. You were keeping the forest out there and we were keeping like the water flowing and less malaria. And I just wanted to briefly show you another photo because I think it's a very good example of how these cloud forests or mountain forests are actually capturing water from the clouds. So here you can see a tree, and under the tree, if you pay attention, the grass is green. That's why this donkey is eating the grass here, because beyond the tree branches and canopy where the water from the fog drips is actually dry. So I think it's a very good example, and this is just a tree. So imagine if you have a whole forest, how much water is being collected from the clouds. This an example is from Marsabit, which is about 400 kilometers north from Nairobi, 200 from Mount Kenya, more or less. It's a little bit drier than Mount Kenya, but it gives a very good idea of how cloud forest contributes to capturing water. And before I finish my presentation, I don't want to take a lot of your time. I just wanted to briefly talk about bushmeat because this is a topic I've been working on as well. And I want to talk about bushmeat because of this picture. So this is a photo of a Twa family in Congo, and Twa relate is a group of pygmies. So if you pay attention to the photo, you will see that this family has a lot of children, but very few assets. You can see their house on the back. You can see they have a very small farm, and the forest at the back. So actually, bushmeat is a source of protein and nutrients for all these children. So I want to just highlight when we talk about bushmeat that we need a wildlife trade. We need to make a distinction between what is used for subsistence and what is used for international trade, and how people consume bushmeat for necessity because it's the cheapest or only protein they have available, or how it becomes a product of a luxury, that we use it as a fancy food that we can eat maybe in some of the larger urban centers in Africa, or how it's a medicinal product that it's used for some other diseases in the Asian markets. So it's very different, the use of wildlife or bushmeat. And I want to highlight that at the local level, there's been traditional ecological knowledge, high detailed traditional ecological knowledge related to cultural taboos on what can be hunted in which season, which species, and which numbers. And that has allowed, as one of our speakers before highlighted, coexistence of humans and wildlife for a long time. What is happening now is that we're disrupting these traditional ecological knowledge systems. We are disrupting these cultural taboos, and we are linking these local people hunting from subsistence and turning it into a global huge trade. And that is also producing loss of the cultural and traditional ecological knowledge, and is disrupting the system to have negative effects, as we can see from the current pandemic. And I just wanted to briefly say that actually, as the map you can see here, there's been a few studies, especially in the lowlands in the Congo, by John Fa and colleagues, that show that certain species can be sustainably hunted, not all of them, of course, in certain areas. So it doesn't mean that all hunting is bad. There's some hunting that can be sustainably promoted, and in a way, it's also fair to these communities that have limited access to other sources of protein to allow this hunting. I'm not saying all kind of huntings, I'm just saying there's certain hunting that should be allowed, and it can be allowed to be carried on sustainably. And with that, I wanted to finish off just thanking you for your attention. And I wrote my email there, but feel free to write to me if you want to talk more about bushmeat or about forest benefits and how these affect us as humans and how we are all related to nature and part of it. So thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, I think Mapendo already introduced Fola, but Fola, you can go ahead now. Yeah, welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Please, is my screen available now?
No. Yes, yes.
Okay. It's in presentation mode.
Do you want to put it on slideshow mode?
Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah, I'm just suggesting you put it in the slideshow mode.
Yeah, I've already done that. Maybe it's taking time to load.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Now, once again, I want to appreciate Professor Beth for inviting me for this presentation. And as rightly introduced, my name is Fola Babalala. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. And also I run a non-governmental organization known as Safe Sahara Network here in sub-Sahara part of Africa, but in Savannah part of Nigeria. And now I've been invited to speak on the role of community conservation in avoiding the next pandemic. And from all what we have been heard today, it's quite interesting that we're discussing the role of biological diversity and how it applies to conservation, especially at the rural level. And I appreciate that Ida has already done a lot of work by introducing us to different types of biodiversity at the rural level. Now let me keep going. Am I in presentation mode now?
No, but I think it's okay. You can keep going if it's not shifting into presentation mode.
Oh, you can see this now.
Yeah, we can see it. I just meant in PowerPoint, you know, down at the bottom, you put it into slideshow mode.
Okay.
But it's okay.
Right. Now, what are the major issues with biodiversity conservation? The major issue are these four that I quickly highlight here. And the first one is right now we have the issue of land use change. The next one is overexploitation of plant and animal. The third one is the ever-increasing climate change that we're facing all over the world. And the last one is the invasive alien species in our local community. All these are part of the major issue we are facing right now all over the world. And this has led to loss of biodiversity at the global level and at the local level. But I have two news to tell us about biodiversity loss. The first news is that we are first losing many of these plants and animals around the world, and they are faced with extinction. That is a sad news. If we have this sad news, there will be a good news. The good news is that we can reverse this trend of biodiversity loss by acting now to increase our relationship and be accountable for the protection. Now, if we have this, what do we need to do as humans? According to what we did last 2 weeks in 2020 World Biodiversity, we discovered that right now we need to change the way we act. We need to change the way we relate to our biodiversity. We need to change the way we use biodiversity. And that is what 2020 World Biodiversity is telling us. If we need to change the way we move, sorry, I've been locked out.
We can still hear
No,
you.
you are there. We can see you, we
yeah.
can hear you, and we can see the slides. But what you can do is that you can just move to the next slide.
Okay, all right then.
You can just, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes.
If you can see the slide,
okay.
The presentation mode is not working. So what you can do that you can manually move to the next slide.
Okay, all right, that's good. Now, let's move to conservation. Conservation refers to the management of human use of organism or ecosystem to ensure that we use it sustainably. Sustainable use is one of the key, but apart from sustainable use, we also protect, we maintain, we rehabilitate, we restore, and even enhance the population of ecosystem. These are all part of conservation that we need to focus on if we want to move ahead to the next phase of saving ourselves from pandemic. Now, the issue that we are currently having with biodiversity conservation is that conservation done by the government and at the state level, we discover is really not working as it's supposed to be. Therefore, rural community, especially indigenous ones, have been always challenged the state for taking over the ownership of their resources. And if government continue to take over their resources, things will not work the way it's supposed to be. Why? What is the trend of ownership of biodiversity loss over the years? We discover from literature that before 19th century, the use of sacred groves, the use of ancient rural forests, the use of even sacred forests provided nature protection for us at the local level. But after 19th century, by the time we go to the late 19th century, we have the introduction of national parks, we have introduction of game reserves, introduction of forest reserves. And all this one took over and changed the ownership of natural forests from the rural people to the state, to the government. And this is what we are actually following all over the world. Now, let me move to the key topic of the day, which is community conservation. Community conservation. Now, community conservation is just an approach of biodiversity conservation whereby we include local people. The local people that we tend to sideline after the 19th century, now we're trying to bring them back on board because we know if local people that have the unique comprehensive knowledge of their own landscapes and wildlife can be introduced back into the management, they are going to do a lot in the protection. Therefore, what we normally do under community conservation is upskilling the people who already have the key knowledge of the hotspot, who already have the key knowledge of the landscape, in order that they involve and engage them in the protection of all these resources. And now, different people, different projects, different organizations, especially NGOs, have been carrying out projects all over the world in order to introduce community-based conservation projects. And now, what are the really aim? and the goal of this project. The aim of this project is to increase the benefit from alternative livelihood activities. What are the livelihood activities that people engage in the forest? Now, let's try to create alternative to this so that we can reduce the pressure on the natural forest. These community-based conservation activities started around 1990s and thereabout. Then it is aimed at establishing a direct link of conservation with the local benefits. So we're trying to look at how can the local community get benefit from the forest, and what are the ways by which we can use this benefit to create alternative livelihood for them. Now, what are the common features of the project going on around the world with respect to community? These are some of the projects that we try to look at how local community responds to community need. How can our conservation projects connect people to what they have known as their place or their rural place? How can this community how can the forest link people to people around the area? Or how can we create opportunity for people to get involved in conservation work? How can we energize the community? And what are the process by which we can get public access into the use of this?
Excuse
yes.
me. Yeah, I have your PowerPoint. So because your slides are not advancing, may I take over the share of the screen and I can project your slides and then you can continue?
Okay, all right then.
So I think you can stop sharing and then I'll go ahead and share. Oh, now you're advancing. Because you're still not in the slideshow mode and you were not advancing the slides.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can just post the PPT in the chat window so that the people can download and follow it up. Because anyhow, it's going to be difficult for him to control now. I think in that way, it would be easy for everyone to download and see what he's talking about.
Okay. Yeah, Fola, why don't you try that?
Okay. After the sharing, it's still not working.
Yes, Beth, can you try? He stopped sharing his screen. Can you share your screen or?
Maybe Jaya, you should ask him to send it to you so that you can then project it.
Yeah. Okay. Or otherwise, can you just upload your slide in the chat window so that everyone can download and follow you?
Okay, I can.
Beth,
I don't.
or can you able to share the screen, Professor Beth?
Beth, were you able to do that? Can you able to do that?
I think Professor Beth is out of connection. Do you have the files with you, a PDF file or PPT file? Fola? Yep. Beth, can you share your screen?
Yes. Let's see. Is that okay?
No, it's coming. Yes, it's come. Can you change it to PPT mode, or you can just navigate? Yeah, it's in PPT mode. Yes, Fola, you can go ahead. Fola?
Did we lose Fola?
I don't know. Yeah, Fola left the conversation. It's getting today. Today, technology is just pushing us to the corner. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I could see Fola left the conversation. I hope he will come back soon.
I wonder if we should move on to the next speaker and then jump back to Fola when he comes back.
Yeah, that would be excellent, please.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to ask, we have another one of our young biologists in conservation biology, Andrew Kibogo at University of Rwanda. He is going to introduce the next speaker, which I hope that Dr. Julius Nziza is here. Andrew, maybe you can introduce him and see if check if he's here in the webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Beth. Hope Dr. Nziza is around. Dr. Nziza is a wildlife vet. He holds a master's in public health from University of Rwanda, College of Medicine and Health Sciences, and Masters of International Infectious Disease Management from Makerere University. He is currently Rwanda country head of veterinarian of Gorilla Doctors and the country coordinator for emerging pandemic threats program Predict2, where he oversees mountain gorilla pandemic threats.
Sorry for the interruption. I think Fola is back.
Oh.
Sorry for the interruption. Yeah, Dr. Fola is back. I think he could just finish it out.
All right.
Yeah, maybe Foley, you could be a little bit quick going through.
Okay, can you still see my slide, please? Hello?
Yes, Fola, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, now, what are those factors that can contribute to the success of community conservation to mitigate our future pandemic? The first area that I want to quickly talk about is the supportive of local context. If you really want the local community as a channel of fighting the next pandemic, is that any project that we have to do at the local level must likely be effective. We have to have on ground effective local governance. And number two, we need to have an institution aligned with the project and goals of community project if we need to fight the next pandemic. And there should be well-defined land structure and land tenure at the local level to be able to fight our next pandemic. Now, one thing that has been discovered in various projects that we have seen, we have read about community-based conservation, is that it is always successful when the project emphasizes great level of direct support from the people. People needed to have a support. People needed to be engaged, and people need to be participative in the project in order to fight the next pandemic. The next one is we are trying to look at socioeconomic context of conservation project. What are the socioeconomic contribution to the livelihood of the people? How are the people getting access? Do we have access to? There will not be what? Adequate and sustainable conservation or involvement and engagement of the people. Now, from the study recently conducted, we look at the bushmeat, as Ide rightly said. True bushmeat, we know, is one of the easy access by which people get pandemic. Especially, we have looked at Ebola, we have seen the issue of the COVID-19, and looking at the market chain. If we need to break the market chain, we need to break the spread of the pandemic. We have to study the market chain. If you look at the market chain from the hunter to the wholesaler to the retailer and finally to the consumer, what are the different activities going on within this marketing chain? And how do we see people change meat from one stakeholder to the other stakeholders? This will contribute a great way in order for us to solve the problem of the next pandemic. Now, I've talked about local participation and engagement. Local participation is very important in order to fight the next pandemic. When we bring any project to the local level, when we take any project to the local level, we are not seeing people as people who don't have any contribution to our project. Therefore, by engaging with local cultural tradition and leaders, we are going to have a success in our community conservation approach. Now, another thing are the benefit that the people get. Are we really targeting the locals, or we are targeting the elite people? We conducted a survey in South Africa and were able to discover that the elite are some of the people that contribute challenges to conservation work at the local level. So if we need to go about our conservation activity at the local level, we need to really know the indigenous and the local people and get them involved rather than the local elite taking over the project. Now, the last one I'm talking about is market integration. Community-based conservation is more likely to be successful in communities that are more integrated into local and global markets, and their species or habitats of interest face fewer pre-existing threats. So by market integration, we are looking at value addition, and we are looking at external wage labor opportunity for the local people. If we're able to add value to what local people are getting at their local level, it's going to create a market integration for their resources. But one care must be taken. We have to be very careful. When we have a very good market integration at the local level, there may be issue of pressure on vulnerable resources and habitat. And when we have pressure will lead to more exploitation, and more exploitation will lead to degradation. So market integration must take care of sustainable exploitation and sustainable utilization. Now, let me quickly round up because my time has been taken away. We need to understand how local communities use biodiversity, and we need to really look at how this contributes to sustenance of their livelihood in order to explore the way we need to avoid future pandemic. And if we're able to understand people's livelihood, we're able to understand their local level livelihood and how to use resources, this will help us in designing any strategy that we want to go about in fighting the future pandemic. So on a final note, I'm just trying to create a platform by which we try to engage and look at what is happening at the local level in order to make community conservation work. If we're able to make community conservation work, a lot of our paperwork, from the research to the government, will be able to take care of the future pandemic. And I'll say thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Great, thank you, Fola. Yeah. All right, now we'll go back to Andrew Kibogo. You can introduce the next speaker.
Yep. Thank you, Professor Beth. Let me take this opportunity to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Julius Nziza. He's a wildlife vet. He has a master's in public health from University of Rwanda, College of Medicine and Health Sciences, and a master's of international infectious disease management from University of Makerere. He's currently the Rwanda country head of veterinary of gorilla doctors and country coordinator for emerging pandemic threats program, PREDICT2, where he oversees mountain gorilla health and doing research for zoonotic viral infectious disease pathogens through surveillance and the laboratory aspects from wildlife that are potentially pandemic at human-wildlife interface. Prior to this position, he worked as a wildlife vet, field wildlife vet for Rwanda Development Board based at Nyungwe National Park in southwestern Rwanda. Dr. Julius has attended number of trainings related to his career and has presented in many national and international conferences his findings, mostly on wildlife conservation, bridging it with the public health. The next speaker is Dr. Jane.
Maybe we can go ahead. You can introduce the next speaker. Andrew, why don't you wait? Let's do Julius, and then when he finishes, you can introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, we do.
Yes, and is my presentation up? Sorry, I'm trying to share.
Yes,
Yes,
we can
it's
see
up
you,
there.
but still you have to change it to presentation mode.
Just click on slide.
Sorry, come again?
Just click on slideshow in PowerPoint, lower right-hand corner, click on slideshow, the little icon.
Okay.
You know how you normally give a PowerPoint and you put it into slideshow mode? Just click on that little icon.
Yes. Let me. Yes. Is it on?
Yeah. No, maybe it's coming.
Yeah, it's come. You can start. It's there already. Julius, you can go ahead. We can see that.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Professor Beth, for inviting me, and I'm so thankful for all the past presenters, including the honorable ministers who opened this session. I'm very, very grateful to talk to you about some of the work that I've been doing, but also grateful that this conversation is going on, especially in the current circumstances. Yeah. So quickly, I wanted to give you an overview of exactly these threats, pandemic threats. COVID is not a unique aspect in this, because around in 1920, there was the Spanish flu that almost infected 500 million people globally. And we have been trying to see, even research is being done in how it affected Africa, because that's some time long ago. But as you can see from my presentation, even another influenza virus affected people in the 1960s. Of course, we have HIV that also affected more than 70 million people. We have the H1N1, which is the swine flu that originated even from Asia. So those are the previous pandemics. And now, in the recent times, since around 2000, we have Nipah virus that affected even Asia and Australia. We have SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, that also again came from Asia. We also have Ebola, which is our own from sub-Saharan Africa, that was also threatened to become a global threat. And even Middle East respiratory syndrome, which was much more concentrated in the Middle East, but also had another H7N9, which was also another Asian influenza that affected also us almost globally. So again, because we are a global village, all of these pandemics are no longer endemic in where they begin from. They spread, and Africa is also affected. And of course, COVID, which is the current one that we are struggling on, has also affected us. So again, I wanted also to look at, to give to you in a nutshell, or in a brief, these emerging infectious diseases. I'm bringing emerging infectious diseases because these are the ones that have really caused much more havoc. Of course, as humans, we have other health problems, including antimicrobial resistance and the other aspects. But the pandemics especially the infectious diseases, they have many drivers, but many the ones, as you can see from my presentation, the first one is the land use change, which involves actually literally destroying us as humans, affecting pristine areas or the naturally scented areas, and we convert them into urban areas, into industrialized areas, and then this really affects us because we are saying that it is the one that is really causing potentially these pandemics. Even agricultural industrial change. One of the things that is really being observed is how we are changing from locally indigenous animals as a source of nutrition, and then we have improved breeds that are really coming up to be source of nutrition. And then, of course, international travel and the commerce. As you could imagine, all of these cases, for example, what we have seen in this COVID pandemic is that most of the cases that we are having is they have come more from where they originated from, for example, in Wuhan, and then they have become a problem to us. So again, it's very, very, very important that land change use, agriculture, industrial change, and international commerce are all very, very important aspects put in all of this as part of drivers. But you see also down, like you see bushmeat. Bushmeat is taken as most probably like the EIDs that have been seen for the last 10 years. Is like bushmeat has also been one of the driving factors. So what is causing mainly this is we are seeing like people, we are using land change use, and of course combined with human population growth. What we see is there is increased contact between humans, our wildlife, and livestock. And what all of this brings is a sharing or a cocktailing of pathogens, disease pathogens between humans, people, and livestock and wildlife. And then, of course, we have increased health risks to all those taxes and all of these scientific taxes that you are talking about. And what comes about is people are impacted by their livelihood and also the economic pressures that we are seeing currently. So where are all of these potential pandemics coming from? We have seen, and this is scientific evidence from the literature and the lab work that has been done, is we, especially 75% of all zoonoses are these diseases that come from animals and affect people. Zoonoses have about 75% have come from the animal origin. And every year, in the past decade, we have been having about 5 new emerging facial diseases. And 3 of them, which is about 60%, are zoonotic in nature. And of course, also empirically, we are seeing wildlife, because of interaction between people and wildlife, because of very many reasons, we are seeing it that they're becoming the highest, they are reaching highest proportions in the recent decades. And when you look at the wildlife in particular, also that from the public health history, we have seen that Chiroptera, or the small mammals called the bats, which are also one of my favorite animals, and the primates and the rodents, they form the highest historical number of, they contribute to the highest historical contribution to the public health emergence of infectious disease that can potentially become a pandemic. So, and this is very, very important putting in the aspect, especially it becomes very, very important because that means the communities around these critical ecosystems that we have in Africa, that where we have the non-human primates and the bats and the rodents, most probably those are the ones that we should keep more concentration on compared to the savanna ecosystems, for example. Of course, the other savanna ecosystems have very important health issues that are affecting even the wildlife they are talking about. Actually, even from these ecosystems, we find even some of these zoonotic diseases can go the reverse way, what we also call the anthropozootic diseases, meaning that we can have a health situation from the people that can affect a critically endangered species, and then which can cause out wiping of that population. And for example, that population could be critical for any the ecosystem as flagship species, or even economically to the country. So all of these are very, very important to have in mind for us as the technical people on the ground to understand and make sure that we provide it to the policymakers so that we have rules and regulations that govern both from the human side and also the wildlife side. And how this happens, of course, emergence of any infectious disease, they usually have what we call reservoirs, and usually by nature-wise, because of the ecological adaptation and of these viruses, and also I'm concentrating on the viruses because of their nature, because of their public health impact, and also even the biodiversity impact, especially from the wildlife aspects, from the animal side, is like it is not easy to control them. They don't have usually quick treatment methods. So from the veterinary aspect, from the public aspect, viruses are challenging. So usually we have a spillover from any mode, depending on the virus. It can be through respiratory, or it can be through consumption by ingestion, or any other aspect, and then it can go directly to the people, or sometimes it can go through the domestic animals that these wildlife live with, and then what we call animal amplification, they could go to the humans, from the wildlife to the people, to the domestic animals, and then to the people. And then it can come as an emerging infectious disease. Of course, one of the aspects that we usually keep back in our mind is there are very many mechanisms, complicated mechanisms that usually happen before that the virus can stabilize in a population. And usually that is a challenge because every virus behaves in its way, and it's very, very important that's why we need to study much more about them. So if you don't mind, I wanted to bring you quickly of the virus that is affecting the global aspect, but us in Africa, it's really, really already causing issues. The coronavirus, which has also been one of my backbone researches, is coronaviruses have, of course, from the evolutionary aspect, they have ancestors, and mainly we have the lineages that have originated from bats, and bats are unique mammals, very good contributors to the ecosystem services, mainly especially in Africa and also around the tropics, because most of them, that's where they stay, because we have a high diversity of these animals, and they are pollinators, they are insect eliminators, and they also do other activities. When we are sleeping at night, they contribute a lot. And they have adapted so much because they are flying mammals, they adapted so much. Their immunity is different. They can withstand very many coronavirus infections, and they withstand them. So that's why even if you have read the literature, I bet most of you have read the literature, again, because of this COVID scare, is like there is certainty that most probably this virus could have come ancestrally from bats, but most probably it went to the people, went to humans through an intermediate host. And I think research is being done to ascertain that. There is research on pangolins. There is also research, there have been research on the snake coronaviruses. So all of these coronaviruses, they are so, they become almost ubiquitous. They have affected different species from bats to, we have had them in veterinary services. They have affected cats, they have affected pigs, they have affected even cheetahs in the wild, and they also affected even warthogs and other animals. They have even affected marine mammals. So again, this shows how wildlife is part and parcel of our lives. But it is very, very, very important to understand that ecologically, this wildlife could be much more adapted to some of the viruses that could feed us, that they could bring to us. So it's very, very important from all aspects to make sure that we live harmoniously with these animals. I wanted also to bring to your attention, and this is something, if you have time, I would kindly request you to look at some of the efforts that have been done in Africa and at a global perspective, especially looking at, from the scientific point, identifying known and even new zoonotic viruses, especially at the high risk human interfaces. The emerging pandemic threats program that have used the One Health approach have worked in about 15 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including Rwanda, my native country, and we have, what do you have? This program had other departments, or I could also sectors, looking at the One Health approach sector development. We had also preventive teams that was looking at the community resilience aspect to see how people who are near conservation areas, how they could adapt very well in these scenarios. And also we looked at, especially from the scientific aspect of identifying viruses, we also established critical masses of younger scientists who could even do quick laboratory diagnosis and test for any of these viruses that could be affecting us. And in fact, now at the forefront of it, particularly in Rwanda, we have like 2 younger scientists who are working hand in hand with the Ministry of Health as we study this virus and also identify, especially from the mountain gorillas, because this is a very, very critical population for us. So again, this is a program that African countries could build on. We have, this program has establishment in Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon, Senegal, Guinea, Ivory Coast, and even in Nigeria. So again, all of these are the programs that can be built on, especially from the biomedical aspect. But again, bringing in scientists, like some of us who have a background of biodiversity conservation and wildlife health, so that we can contribute to public health and again contribute positively so that we mitigate these issues that health-wise can come from wildlife and affect people, or even from people and affect wildlife. So these are the countries that we worked on but more importantly is the program has expanded into also West Africa, and I think it's one of the areas that I would kindly request people to focus on and also see how we can work together to mitigate all of these effects. So from the back of my mind, before I conclude, I was looking at some of the aspects. Of course, there are very many, how we could prevent future pandemics, especially from the biodiversity aspect, biodiversity conservation aspect. One is, there is a need, and thank you for the honorable ministers who really brought us on board, telling us many of the biodiversity aspects that the different countries are doing, including my honorable minister, Dr. Jean Dijk. Like we need to promote biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity conservation beginning from the lowest, from the younger people to the highest, to the old generation. Because most of these efforts, if people understand the importance of biodiversity, they will be more friendly to biodiversity. Therefore, that will decrease, for example, efforts of cutting down trees unnecessarily, because when you cut down, you are eliminating pollinators. When you cut down trees, you are eliminating food for these other herbivores, and then these herbivores will come in urban areas. If you are promoting biodiversity, you prevent poaching. Poaching meaning that people will not come and kill wildlife for food. And then that will prevent people's exposure to these natural viruses in this wildlife, and then we couldn't have it in the urban populations. Even building stronger public health ecosystems, health systems, and this is very, very, very important. And it's very, very, very important because at the end of the day, people have to be treated if they are sick. Resilient communities around biodiversity conservation areas, people understanding the essence that they don't need to go to pick water from the conservation area, so that they can have that water, so that they can have nutrition, not going to look for food inside the national park. Socioeconomic development. This is very, very, very important also, because at the end of the day, people will go in these biodiversity conservation areas, and most of probably the highest percentage will go in because they are poor. So if we eliminate those poverty causes, then most people will be friendly with these biodiversity conservation areas. And again, one of the areas that has been neglected for long, and this is where I feel most probably it should be promoted so much, is research also in wildlife health. Most of the promotion has been on public health, but we have seen when people get sick and they go to the hospital, they have infectious diseases, and these diseases have other different sources. So wildlife health, meaning I'm here like most probably I would have mentioned that biodiversity health, and is very, very, very important, meaning that we need collaboration between all of these other aspects of wildlife health, public health, environmental health, and others to come on board to sort of critical populations, issues that are affecting people. And of course, this should have been my first point, policy advocacy. We need the supporters of the policy makers, so that again, this is very, very important, mainly for make sure they become laws, and for funding aspects and all other aspects, so that they become nitty-gritty for these populations that are living in these critical ecosystems, near ecosystems, and even adjacent ecosystems. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julian. Yeah, Andrew, you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Beth. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Jane Karugiza-Oroch. She is a climate change impact specialist with a background of biology and vector ecology. She holds a PhD from University of Pretoria, South Africa. She is currently Executive Director for South African Science Service Center for Climate Change and Adaptive Land Management, SASCAL, where she is responsible for providing strategic leadership and senior management expertise in research, human capital development, and provision of climate services in SADC region. Her current position, Dr. Mkarugiza, she was Managing Director for South African National Space Earth Observation, whereby she was also responsible for providing leadership and the strategic goals for directorate, and for ensure that these are aligned with the overall goals. And she was a lecturer at the University of Pretoria in Department of Geography, GIS, and Meteorology. She's still a visiting lecturer at the Center of Environmental Studies at the University of Pretoria, where she teaches MSc students. She's fascinated by the nature, particularly how all things are interconnected. This evolved into career in environmental sciences for last 10 years as a climate change impact. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed journals and presented on numerous local and international conferences. Here the floor is open for Dr. Jane. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and I am really honored to be here, especially to listen to the very powerful ladies that introduced this topic today. But I'm also very happy to connect with Beth, my old colleague. I have not seen her in so many years. So it's been great for me to be invited and to be part of this very important meeting of today. So I am just going to summarize in a way what has been spoken here. And I must say that it's exciting for me to be speaking on this topic, which in my opinion is very neglected. And I like very much what the present speaker just said, because this topic, particularly of biodiversity and ecosystem health, is very important, but it's very neglected in very many aspects. And that is why when we get a pandemic like COVID-19, we are all left unprepared and very concerned. So it was encouraging for me when I heard about the Center of Excellence that could be built in Rwanda. And my mind was like, maybe this could be the Center of Excellence for biodiversity and ecosystem health. And actually hearing what I just heard from the last speaker from Rwanda, I think this would be a very good consideration if this can be done. So I will now try to see if I can share my slides, and then we can proceed from there. Thank you. Okay, so this is my presentation. I was given a topic of land use planning, climate response, and for pandemics, and I've just introduced that topic. So the presentation outline, I'm just going to introduce very briefly what SASCO is. This is, I think, an institution that is not very well known. Then I remind us and put everything together that has been said on the connectedness between nature, between people, and between the parasites. And when many times you don't even think about it, only when something like this happens. Then I'm going to bring the whole concept of animal and people and health into just one statement, which is it's not animal or people health, but it's actually ecosystem health. Then I'll look at climate change in that way, and just put climate change in context of other environmental challenge issues, and to say that it's not only climate change, but so many other things that we are dealing with. Then I'll just have a slide on my last thoughts on land use planning, climate change resilience, and adaptation. So this is SASCO. SASCO is the Southern Africa Science Center for Climate Change and Adaptive Land Management. It is an initiative of 5 countries. You can see them on the slide. Angola, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and our sponsor is the German government through the Ministry of Education and Research. So SASCO was formed about in 2012, but that was after the Bali Action Plan at COP13, where there was a proposal to form climate change centers. And the reason for this is that climate change and many of the ecosystem services and functions we deal with, they are not only localized in one country, but they go across boundaries. So it was very important for us to initiate action that is done around and at a transboundary manner. And that also includes socio-economic change and the others. So SASCO was formed together with another sister organization of ours in West Africa called Unesco. And we have, our job really is on research on capacity building and provision of climate services. As this was not a SASCO conference, I have just limited what we do only to this slide, but I'm sure we'll have another opportunity where we can show you a variety of products and services that we have produced from the research perspective, from the climate service, and also from other interesting aspects we have, like our automatic weather station, about 160 of those in SADC that actually give almost real-time data on climate services. So that will be another tab. But if you want to know anything about SASCO, please go on our website, which is on this slide, and you can see everything there. And if you want to contact us, then you're also very welcome to contact us. So back to the topic. I'm always intrigued by this quotation. This is a quotation I saw a long time ago when I was, I think, in high school. And it says, big fleas have little fleas, and upon their backs to bite them. And little fleas have lesser fleas, and so ad infinitum. And you can see the picture below. We are all connected. We are connected by what we eat. We are connected in different food chain and food webs. And we are connected even in different parasites that bite us and also bite other things. So when we talk about pandemics, particularly the infectious diseases, and the topic I think that most people spoke about were the zoonotic diseases, is this interconnection between people and animals and climate and everything else that we know. So when we want to address a topic of that nature, we can not only address it separate from the other, and that is one problem we still have around this topic, is that most research work is now done in silo, and very little interdisciplinary work is actually being promoted and even being funded, because many people believe it's so complex, there are so many variables, and it's very difficult to even know what is causing. But this is the issue here. And I like the way everybody called for a focus on this topic. That's what I'm also doing, to say we need to tackle this topic because it comes unexpected. The research is there, but transforming that research into application remains very, very small. And that's where we are doing. The second picture shows the reason that we're not only connected when it comes to what we eat, but so when climate changes. This picture shows in the highland regions, for example, where there were glaciers and the glaciers have melted and areas have become warmer, and that has also attracted mosquitoes and their related diseases in those areas. And that's why the rearrangement, redistribution of diseases becomes important. And that causes a lot of problems, because many times these infectious diseases go in areas that are new, people do not have immunity, they are not prepared. And once again, monitoring becomes critical, and the research is very, very important for us to be able to offer to our policymakers. So this is it again. It's not about human or it's not about animal health, but it's about the ecosystems. Everybody has spoken about the value of biodiversity, that is the basis for health. It's also basis for all the ecosystems and functions that we have, the provisions, the supporting, the culture, and the regulation. And the integrity of these ecosystems is directly connected to well-being of the people. So we destroy biodiversity, we destroy the integrity and functioning and connectedness of ecosystem. We have produced an environment where diseases will flourish, where people won't feel safe, and where we'll get some of these pandemics as we are seeing. When you also go to analyze the SDGs, for example, look at the SDG 3, which talks about well-being and health. It's linked to almost all the other SDGs, and therefore becomes critical for us to look at human health, ecosystems health rather, in context of the water, the climate action, life on land, and all these are things that we're aspiring for. And again, of course, one of the challenges we have, even as we tackle SDGs, is that in most cases, the SDGs are tackled individually. But actually, there is so much interaction between SDGs. And sometimes when we tackle them into these relationship aspects, we can even reduce the duplication of resources and share data correctly and be able to monitor these targets in a more organized manner. So it's all about biodiversity. It's all about ecosystem services and functions. It's all about the health, which is a function of the integrity of the ecosystems. Then climate change. Climate change is not acting alone, of course. Several people have spoken about that one. We have a high population growth and mobility. People, we are able to move. It's a global village. We have intensive use of the land for agriculture, for mining, for water extraction, for so many other things. We have land degradation and fragmentation. And of course, we have pollution of air and water, and we have diseases. All these, including climate change, they create conditions for vector-borne and zoonotic diseases. Congestion in the urban areas, new habitats for disease, new increased host and people accessibility, and high vulnerability to anything that comes about as we are doing today. Then the focus should not be on the disease. I think the private speaker has mentioned it, but the focus should be on where is the disease coming from, which in most cases is from the destruction of the real basis that provides strength to the ecosystems and therefore the people themselves and the protection of the biodiversity. One of the things that we used to study was something that was called the dilution effect in biological diversity, whereby the more the biodiversity, the more we are actually prevented from getting parasites. But as soon as we have lost biological diversity, we are exposed. And that's why we should not get confused with artificial plantation, because these are monoculture. On the surface, it looks like we have big trees or many, but actually we need biodiversity in big numbers to be able to act as protection for us. So climate change is there. Information on climate change has been there for so many years. It affects all the other sectors we know of, but also the impacts of climate change on water, on agriculture, on everything else will end up causing an impact also on human health, which becomes a critical aspect and very urgent for us to solve and tackle at this stage. So where are we in all this? The previous speakers have spoken a lot. There's a lot of statistics. Our speakers before in the high-level session also spoke a lot about this. So where are we now? And I'm saying we are actually almost revisiting the tragedy of the commons. And this is a condition whereby when people share a resource, everybody exploits it at their own personal use without necessarily thinking about the sustainability of the resources. And this is very clear. Human beings, we have done it in the pastures that we graze, we have done it in agricultural production, we've done it in mining, and now we are doing it to the atmosphere by producing all this carbon dioxide without looking at how it's going to impact all of us at the end of the day. So we could be reliving the tragedy of the commons. So climate change and sustainable land use, loss of biological diversity, are diminishing nature's defense systems, forcing the remaining species to change their habitats and their habits. Parasites must always find hosts to survive to. And if we have destroyed some of the hosts, then they will look for other hosts. And at the moment, man could be the most efficient host and actually the carrier of most of these infections. This is where we are. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about all this? In my last slide, I think I just have a few thoughts that I thought we could use. And this is just a repetition, a summary of what has been said before. Land use planning to safeguard ecosystem functioning. We must build climate resilient institutions, sectors, businesses. What about energy? There are several projects that are looking at green hydrogen energy. We should prioritize this because at the end of the day, the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is increasing every day. It's not going away maybe in the next 50 or 100 years, even if we stop now. But we must focus on adaptation too as we reduce greenhouse gases. We need to extend partnerships beyond traditional ones. There are other institutions that are coming like the Future Earth, which is the Future Earth's regional office for Southern Africa. And we also must know and must not shy to avail a budget for environmental protection. Even adaptation needs money. Mitigation, of course, needs a lot. Everything we spoke about, the health systems, conservation, education, information and awareness, everything needs resources. But I think there is a chance for us to work together and share these resources, share information, stop duplicating efforts and duplicating studies. I think with all these pandemics, with economic crisis, I think it's time for us to really go into this talking and partnering to make sure that we have results that are used, not duplicating results for us. So I looked at climate resilience just to remind ourselves what exactly are we speaking about and how can we bring in climate resilience in this situation with COVID. Climate resilience is the ability to anticipate, to prepare for, and to respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to climate. It goes on further and says that improving climate resilience involves assessing how climate change will create new or alter current climate-related risks, taking steps to better cope with these risks. So my last question would be, looking at the COVID-19 and the way it has expressed itself, so how are we, as far as creating resilient institutions is concerned, creating resilient countries, creating resilient cities and infrastructure? Did we anticipate the COVID-19? Did we prepare for it? How fast and well have we responded to it? How then are we taking climate resilience very seriously? This is just my concluding remarks and question for us to be able to rethink our ways to see how we can really change this situation and be able to protect our biodiversity, plan better, and be prepared and respond to epidemics that will come anyway. So that will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Great. All right, so those were our expert speakers. I'm going to turn it back over to Jaya. He, I think, is going to bring us into the question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Beth. I mean, today, unfortunately, the technology is not on our side. I mean, there's a lot of disruption in the connection, but nevertheless, I mean, we don't want to just leave it like that, because already there is a lot of question has been raised in the chat window. I mean, it's very dynamic. I mean, even some of the presenters, they are just responding immediately there. Now, my colleague Samuel Patti, he has also took note of all the questions, and I invite Professor Beth, joined by Samuel Patti, to moderate this question and answer and discussion session. I mean, I think we can limit it within 15 to 20 minutes. Professor Beth and Samuel.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jaya. Yes, so I have a couple of questions from the audience. So from the many presentations, we have understood clearly, I mean, what the linkages between biodiversity and pandemics are. So the first question is that what do we consider to be the perceptions of zoonotic disease risks among African communities? Because from the presentations, we've learned that consumption of bushmeat is one of the main, causes of some of these diseases. So what is the level of perception among the African communities? And the audience wants the speakers to give some important case studies from the places that they have worked, or some evidence from the literature to tell, I mean, whether people are really aware that some diseases can be transmitted to them through the consumption of bushmeat. So that's the first question. So perhaps maybe Ida can take that. The second, which is also related to bushmeat, it says that how can we deal with this cultural issue of bush meat consumption in Africa as we strive to limit future pandemics? What are the regulatory frameworks, when it comes to consumption of bushmeat? Are there any local bylaws in the community conservation approaches, that are available in Africa? So maybe we can take these questions, and then I'll read the last two. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel. Could you repeat the question to me again? The first one you said I should answer?
Yes, so it says perceptions of zoonotic disease risks among African communities. What is the level of awareness? And do you have any important case studies from the places that you have worked, or some evidence from the literature that tells the level of awareness, among African communities that some diseases could be transmitted through the consumption of bushmeat?
Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to be sure I heard properly. So I think the level of, the first thing we should be aware is that there's many types of communities in Africa. So are we talking about urban communities? Are we talking about rural communities? And when we talk about rural communities, are we talking about farmers, pastoralists, or hunter-gatherers? So to put it into very briefly context, I think urban populations were maybe not aware before, but they have more access to information. So they see the news on internet, they hear the radio, they watch TV, they see the big Ebola outbreak that happened in West Africa in 2014. And they're more aware of it. So at least they get the media attention. So if they didn't know, because themselves they're not hunters and they don't have the experience of dealing with the wildlife themselves, at least they have access to information, which is a very powerful tool. So for example, from a study published in Liberia, that you can ask me and I can share, it shows that in urban centers in Liberia, bushmeat decreased dramatically consumption at the urban centers following the Ebola outbreak. But these people have access to information. So now we go to the rural populations, and it depends on the context. So again, in the rural areas, some have access to information, but some don't have access. So one of the areas I work in Congo, there's no phone coverage, there's no radio coverage apart from one local station, but it doesn't even reach all the villages around the national park. So you can see here that these people would not watch TV, they don't even have electricity, and they're not aware about the big things happening on the news. So maybe they don't know that there's an Ebola outbreak somewhere else if it's not nearby. So it's a little bit different. But on the other side, if these rural communities that have or may not have access to information, if themselves, they've been evolved in this sturdy area or in this context, so they maybe have their, as I said, their cultural taboos around what should be eaten or not. So for example, in this study area in central Congo, it's taboo to eat a pangolin. So all this issue about the coronavirus, that it was probably one of the studies shows it may be transmitted from a pangolin. So obviously these people would never had that problem because they don't consume pangolins. So you see, you need to go to the context. So it's a little bit different. I think I can see it as a, so I always say that when we are at the local level and we have these cultural taboos and these traditional ecological knowledge that maintain these people to be linked with their environment very closely to nature for a long time, it works. And when you maybe have this disconnection with nature, like in many urban areas, but at least we have access to information through TV or radio or even WhatsApp, our friends told us or our family tell us, then it's the two extremes of the spectrum, but there's many things in between. So what about these rural communities that lost their cultural taboos, but don't have access to information? And what about these other communities that may have access to information, but their cultural taboos conflict or their religion conflicts with what the information is saying? So I don't think there's an answer to all of them. I think that it's really context specific, but obviously I think we can take advantage of it, so we can use information where there's access to information like internet or TV or whatever to inform people. And maybe in the areas where the cultural taboo have worked, we can reinforce them as well, because sometimes we use this approach to conservation that we arrive there and we tell them that's what we should do from now on. and forgetting that these people had lived there forever before we arrived, and it actually worked out to a certain extent. So I think it's trying to find the solution to every context that fits and is likely to work, if it makes sense. So very different contexts. Yes. Sorry, hopefully it answered the question, Samuel.
Right. Thank you very much.
Can I quickly add a comment?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, this is Fola. Let me quickly say apology again for not seeing my slide during my presentation. I've put the link to my slide on the chat if anybody wants to download it. Now, based on the question just asked now, as Hyde rightly said, we have two different communities in Africa. We have the urban and we have the rural. During the period of Ebola, there was a lot of information about people eating bushmeat. So from a study that we conducted, we discovered that there was a drop in the consumption of bushmeat during the Ebola outbreak, pandemic. But after Ebola, and everybody seems forgotten about spread of Ebola from bushmeat again. So people go back to eating of bushmeat. So bushmeat consumption resumed back to normalcy after the Ebola gone. But during this period of COVID-19, there was no information about linking consumption of bushmeat to Ebola, to COVID. Everything people keep saying is washing of hands, social distancing, physical distancing. There was no information out there discouraging people from consuming bushmeat. So consumption of bushmeat still continue as usual. You can see from the report we received, I think this week, that even in China, people now going back to the wet market to start buying the bushmeat, and the spread now resumes. So during this COVID, there was no information about linking COVID to bushmeat. So people are still eating Ebola, people are still eating bushmeat, whether in the rural area or in the urban area. I think we have to do more by adding that information to our campaign, to our strategy in fighting COVID, that people should watch what they eat, the bushmeat that they eat, that this is linked to the spread of the virus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Beth, I've been trying to send you a message. I don't know whether she's still online. Yes. The next question is say. Yes, the next question is, how can we track the pathogens in bushmeat? Because I mean, as we've seen from the presentations, there are, the forest fringe communities, they depend on the bushmeat as a protein source, and some of these bushmeat may be carrying, the diseases. So what kind of opportunities exist for tracking, these pathogens in the diseases, and how can we create awareness among the forest fringe communities as to which bushmeat could be a potential carrier of diseases?
Hi, maybe I can take that one first, and then somebody else can add again to the point. So I want to clarify something here, that it's sometimes the diseases are not transmitted directly. So the problem, and I think this is what is being the studies have shown for at least COVID-19, is that there's different intermediaries, and we need to understand that. So if there's an animal that carries the disease, let's call it animal A, and humans eat it at the local level, is not a problem. The problem is because humans cannot, the virus cannot be transmitted from animal A to humans. The problem is when there's international trade, and then animal A, that it's smoked or dried up, but maybe not very well, so the virus lives inside, is usually not refrigerated or frozen and taking like we see frozen chicken. It's not the way it's transported bushmeat. So this animal now is in contact with animal B, animal C, and other animals from elsewhere, which in the natural environment would never occur at the same place. So imagine you have an African pangolin that is touching whatever Thailand monkey and something else, and eventually this virus can happen to move from A, B, C to D, E, F, and whatever, and eventually it reach humans. So you see, you need to understand this because it's different. What I've been trying to say from the beginning is that, yes, some rural communities are dependent on bushmeat for protein. But you know, traditionally, I mean, there might be some exceptions, but in general, that is not a problem because these guys are not putting lots of animals together. On the contrary, they're barely eating any bushmeat because it's hard to hunt, it's not easy, and it's hard to preserve it. So they just eat whatever they have, they share it, and that's the end of it. It doesn't stay there for weeks. It doesn't get in touch with animal, BCD, and whatever, and it doesn't get to humans. The problem is when you move from the local consumption level with a very small scale to these international markets where things are put together, they might not be very well preserved, and then you have them in these conditions that are ideal for some strange viruses to reproduce or to mutate, and then it gets to humans. So you see, I think the real awareness is that for those guys at the local level, it might not be a problem. I would say that if you live in an urban center, you should be worried about eating bushmeat. And if you live in a city and your bushmeat is coming from another country, you should be even more worried because all these are the conditions that are more likely to cause the spread of a strange disease that might kill you. You see what I mean? It's not really the local level. Most of the diseases are through this strange process the humans have created by putting different animals that were never in the wild together and creating these opportunities for these viruses to mutate and to reach us.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more on this?
Okay, a quick one from Fola. I think from the question just asked now, I don't think in Africa we put in place the strategy to monitor, to track transmission of zoonotic. And I think this is high time we start to think along this direction because people just, even in the trade seems to be illegal. That is international trade that Aida is talking about. If it's illegal, it's very difficult to track the movement of the zoonotic. But if it is an open market where you can see the transmission or the exchange of the bushmeat from one person to the other, then we'll be able to track the transmission of the zoonotic. But there's a big issue we are fighting right now at local level. You get to the local level, you tell them to stop doing something. They ask you, what is the alternative you are providing? So in my presentation, I mentioned something which is alternative source to livelihood. What are the alternative livelihood we are providing for the locals? If you ask them not to kill or even not to fell or not to not to exploit natural resources. So if our message will sink at the rural level, if the rural level will go by what we are saying, we need to start thinking of alternative source of livelihood to whatever strategy we are planning, because people must survive. People must really eat. And so they will ask you, if you want me to stop, what are you giving in exchange? So we need to start thinking along this line too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Beth, do you have any questions you want to pose to the presenters?
No, I think this was an opportunity to let the participants ask questions. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, right. So the next question is with policies. The audience want to know whether there are any policies or regulatory frameworks on the consumption of bushmeat, potential sources of zoonotic diseases. Anybody wants to take this? Are there any policies, regulatory frameworks? Are there any policy initiatives that are underway in Africa to regulate consumption of bushmeat?
I think if I will quickly talk to that, we have a lot of international policies, frameworks coming from NGO and from the international level. if we look at what we are doing at the national level, I can say sad, it's so sad that we have not really be taken seriously at the national level. Consumption and utilization of these resources, natural this was in quote of the pandemic we are talking about. But there are some paperwork somewhere. There are some nation, some country putting up together policies, but what about implementation? We still have issues with implementation of our policies. If you listen, so we need to find out if exists any policy, but if there is no policy, again, I don't think a framework for implementation at the different level.
Thank you very much. These are the only questions that came up, and because of time, I would like to hand over to Jaya for the concluding part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel and Prosabat. It's a very scintillating discussion, but unfortunately, I mean, we don't have much time to go for it, and I think we'll do once more on this. Now, I would like to invite Professor Beth to give her concluding remarks as well as the way forward. I mean, where we will go from here. Because already we had a few discussion between UNESCO and University of Rwanda, the Center for Excellence in Biodiversity, that I mean, to do a little policy research for Africa, how to get on this pandemics and as well as the biodiversity conservation. Now, I'll request Professor Beth to take over and give us the way forward.
Jaya, before Professor Beth comes in, can I just put in a few words? I just raised my hand.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We didn't see that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It is just to really put in a very quick word and to appreciate this very interesting meeting. But maybe what I'm looking at is how do we engage with the African Union and the regional economic communities so that this level of discussion can be taking place, this level of conversation. Because in Africa, I believe we do have very knowledgeable academics and scientists, but there is a lack of conversation and sufficient dissemination of knowledge. A lot of what you hear and the type of actions that seem to be taken at the country level, even vis-a-vis some of these pandemics, it shows the lack of sufficient grounding of the things they are dealing with. And most of the time, their focus is on what resources can come in, what aid can come in, for them to really further embezzle and not even deal with investing on research and those necessary dissemination of knowledge for people to know. So Africa as a whole continues, despite the intelligentsia, to languish in a situation of limited knowledge. So I really feel that this is a very good webinar, but it's a webinar that should really take up this conversation to a level where we bring in knowledge adequate enough for our policymakers to understand the type of decisions they're taking. Like, for instance, if you look at all the responses to this COVID pandemic and the resources that are coming in, none of the governments would even be looking at investing more in research, investing more in dissemination of knowledge, in bringing in the media to talk about very important issues if we really do not want to see the extinct of the human race. Thank you. I just thought I should put in this word, but also thank everybody. This is just so wonderful. And I will say to you, Jaya, think about what we need to do as a follow-up and really start cracking. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antares. Already we are working with University of Rwanda, the Center for Excellence, with Professor Bath and her team, how to go forward. I mean, already we have started a small research, and we'll be coming out with little policy recommendations, which we can in turn give it to Africa Union. Professor Beth, can you please take over? Some of the colleagues, I mean, they have switched on the video. Can you please put it off? I mean, I'm sorry, it hinders us a lot today. I mean, with the technology and the bandwidth is so low today. Professor Beth?
Great. Yes, thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm going to turn off my camera just after I, oops, that's not it, after I say hello. Let's see. All right, here we go. Okay, and so I'm going to be very brief. I hope that I can give some suggestions for next steps, at least what I see, and some of the commonalities of what we talked about. And of course, we said biodiversity is extremely important. And I'm just showing here one of the species that brought me to Rwanda to study, the Luesti monkey. And I learned a lot about biodiversity from this little animal. But what I want to talk about is, in addition to all the things that are happening, the hope that I have, and the hope that I think all of us can have. And this hope is related to that we have youth that are really taking up the place of research and science and action and education. And in terms of preventing the next pandemic, I just want to check in. Is everyone seeing my slides?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we are seeing it.
So I can say, I heard this earlier, I think Jane mentioned this, the importance of multidisciplinary research. Yes, this is very hard to do. We work in silos, but it's very clear that to address issues of biodiversity, these are both social issues, economic issues, as well as biological. And we need to find innovative ways to work across disciplines. And we also need to look into some innovative and new research areas. There's so much advances happening right now, for example, with metagenomics and the kind of technology we have for this kind of sequencing to look into zoonotics. And a lot more effort could be done there. There's so much data right now about animal movements, lots and lots of data from all this camera trap work that's going on that's available, and we can tap into that. We can also look at really addressing issues of deforestation and fires that occur, the logging, what is driving all of that, and also, of course, the wildlife trade. And I was really glad to hear several of the earlier speakers mention this, that we need behavioral change, because this is driven by behavior, human behavior. And this picture here is showing logging, and guess what the logging is for? It's for people to have fancy furniture far from where these forests are. It's for people demanding fancy furniture, maybe in Asia or in North America, and they have no idea what their demand for that furniture is doing to the environment. And we need to do a better job of that. And then also we need to pay attention to participation. And I'm so glad this came up in many of the talks we heard. We need to really do more than lip service to participation and co-management, because if we don't have ownership and stewardship, if we don't acknowledge that there are groups of people that have tremendous knowledge, even though they may not have gone through formal education, we need to really acknowledge that in order to move forward. And pay attention to building local expertise. What I mean is putting an emphasis on the education systems in the countries where these things are happening, where loss of biodiversity, and a really attention to the role of higher education. Because we can't keep relying on bringing in external support to do everything. We really need to build the education and research systems in country. And then this was also mentioned, human population growth. So I'm not going to spend time here just to say, yes, it's growing exponentially, and the proportion of people living in urban areas is exploding. And we really need to pay attention to that, because that's going to be a really high density of people in a small area demanding a lot of resources. And we need to make sure that citizens understand science. We can see in this current pandemic, that's a big problem, especially in some countries where some people are denying the science or not wanting to believe it. This is also true for climate change. So we really have to do a better job at that. And I have to say, here in Rwanda, that really is a leader in that area of science and understanding science and using science. But the other thing is resilience, and I'm glad, I think Jane and some others also mentioned this, that we can see that with the pandemic, we need to rely on local food sources and local products, because our world's become in one way smaller and another way bigger during these times of pandemic. We need safety nets. We are reliant on the internet, but we cannot be reliant on tourism to promote or support biodiversity necessarily. And I really believe that conservation is more than just doing business, which is really what's being promoted often is about money, money, money. But there's something more, and we heard a lot today from the speakers about the importance of the connection between people and nature. And I'm so glad to hear that, because I think that's what we need to really pay attention to. So I want to end with focus on what's going on now, our next steps. We have an amazing opportunity with this post-2020 biodiversity framework. And if we look back at the Achai biodiversity targets, and some of the speakers who opened this session up mentioned this, there was a vision about living in harmony. And we now know, as was mentioned earlier in this webinar, that we did not attain all of these Achai targets. I think it's relevant for us to look at why didn't we, and how we could do better. And there's been some suggestions that maybe we need to look more at how we make commitments to this framework and to the strategies, and what are the ways that we're going to do reporting and review. We need to reflect on what's just happened, what's happening right now with this pandemic, and the realization that people mentioned, well, this is like a wake-up call, and how can we take that and not continue with business as usual? So I want to emphasize that this is not just about the amount of forest area that we're protecting, it's also about human behavior. And it's about what are the economic drivers. And it's about the data we need to be able to know what is going on, to track pandemics, to track outbreaks, to track early detection of environmental change. That means we need biodiversity information systems. We need data available. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to have an emphasis on training, and in particular, at really good curriculum for science, but also the humanities, to understand our connection to nature, and also higher education, the role of higher education. And again, I want to mention participation, that we need participation by communities who are affected by biodiversity loss. So preventing the next pandemic. I hope you're all seeing with me this picture of space exploration. Yes. This picture, I like to think about this, because I believe if we can send people into space, and we can do space exploration, and we're talking about sending individuals up, citizens up, we can figure this out. Really, we can figure out how not to kill off all of life on Earth. And we cannot go back to the regular business as usual. This is a wake-up call, but I think that there's enough will here, and we have a lot to learn, but we also have learned a lot. And so I retain the hope that through working with motivated people, in particular the youth that we have here, that we can make a difference and figure out how to do this. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I really want to thank the speakers who came. Thank you so much, Jaya, for proposing this and organizing this. This is really a wonderful opportunity. And I really hope that, as Antares said, that we really can take concrete steps forward from here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Beth.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This is great.
Antares, would you like to give few words, final words, Antares?
Actually, after this very beautiful message of Prof. Beth, I would rather we leave it at that and go to sleep with it. The one thing I also want to say, as we talk about all of the scientific approach to understanding the pandemic, we also have to continue to look at the behavioral. And for me, I continue to stress the fact that the behavioral has to really be anchored with our policymakers. Because when you look at, for instance, some of these decisions that have been taken to put up huge infrastructure across Africa, it is impacting on the biodiversity of Africa. And yet nobody is saying anything. So it's money before health, it's money before nature, it's money before conservation. So really, I want to thank you all. And I think this is an initiative that we must really take forward and look again at some of the conventions and see whether we don't want to create a new one. But definitely, this is more than a wake-up call. I think this call has been there, but this is, for me, the beginning of the end. You know, I mean, when I say that, people tend to say, "And what are you talking about?" I said, this is extinction. We must realize that we must call it what it is. Calling it a wake-up call, we still keep them in their comfort zone. But calling it extinction would make them wake up if they are still, you know, dozing. Thank you very much, Prof. Beth. Again, it's been a while I didn't meet with you, but I still recall we had an earlier engagement. And thank you for the wonderful speakers. Thank you, Jaya. This is really just, I believe, the best of all the webinars you've organized so far. So look at the next steps going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antares. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of UNESCO and University of Rwanda. I mean, we thank everyone, all the speakers and all the participants. It was good, and let's think, I mean, what we are going to do further and how we can move forward. We are going to initiate something with the University of Rwanda, and we'll see. I mean, if somebody has any interest, I mean, you can write to us, and we can see how best we could do it together rather than doing it alone. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Hello.
Bye.
Hello. Can we
Thank
have
you.
the presentations? Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.